United States was almost permanently torn in two. But before it broke apart, it had to grow in ways nobody could have ever imagined. By the year 1800, the young American nation was mostly clustered along the eastern coast, bordered by the massive, unexplored wilderness of the western continent. In 1803, the United States made one of the most significant land deals in history, known today as the Louisiana Purchase. For just $15 million, President Thomas Jefferson purchased a colossal stretch of territory from France, paying less than 3 cents for an acre. Overnight, the physical size of the country literally doubled. The new borders stretched from the mighty Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains. It was an impossibly huge expanse of completely untouched wilderness, featuring towering mountain ranges, endless grassy plains, and massive twisting river systems. To understand what they had just bought, the government sent out fearless explorers, most famously the legendary expedition led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. They were sent deep into the great unknown, tasked with mapping the complex river networks and cataloging a breathtaking new world of undiscovered nature. For over 2 years, they bravely navigated through treacherous terrains, documenting hundreds of new animal and plant species that scientists had never seen before. When the explorers returned with their incredible journals, the news sparked an absolute frenzy among the American public back in the crowded eastern cities. To the early Americans, this vast western horizon wasn't just empty land. It was viewed as a massive, blank canvas for the ultimate American dream. Families began to truly believe that it was their God-given right, a powerful concept that would soon be famously known as manifest destiny. They felt divinely ordained to stretch their rapidly growing nation across the entire continent, from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It was a bold, romantic vision of limitless freedom and endless opportunity, inspiring thousands to pack up their lives and boldly head straight west. But this incredible leap forward into the frontier carried a very heavy, unspoken burden, setting the stage for the darkest chapter in American history. Driven by the alluring promise of glittering gold, incredibly rich agricultural soil, and absolute personal freedom, hundreds of thousands of pioneers made a life-altering choice. Entire families packed their entire livelihoods into fragile, wooden-covered wagons, saying a final, tearful goodbye to the comfortable eastern cities they had always known. They braved absolutely brutal weather conditions, constant threats of starvation, and incredibly treacherous mountain passes just to carve out a brand new existence in the West. It was a dangerous journey that forged the legendary American pioneer spirit, an attitude that celebrated hard work, self-reliance, and sheer determination. However, this grand narrative of glorious expansion often ignores a very dark reality. This vast, beautiful frontier was absolutely not an empty, uninhabited piece of land. It was already home to millions of indigenous people, diverse Native American nations who had lived on this land for thousands of years. The relentless, aggressive westward push of the expanding United States government and its settlers led directly to devastating and profoundly tragic consequences for these indigenous nations. Through broken treaties and sheer military force, entire tribes were violently removed from their ancestral homes and forced to march thousands of miles away. This grueling, heartbreaking relocation became known as the Trail of Tears, a devastating journey where thousands perished from exposure, disease, and starvation along the way. It was a profound and irreversible human cost, a dark shadow of suffering deliberately cast for the sake of the young nation's relentless territorial expansion. While the indigenous populations suffered immeasurably, the United States map continued to aggressively grow, incorporating massive new territories at an astonishingly rapid and unprecedented pace. But as these new Western lands were rapidly organized into official territories and prospective states, a deeply terrifying question began to echo across the country. This question struck at the very moral and economic core of the young republic, echoing loudly through the tense political halls of Washington, D.C. Would these newly acquired Western states be completely free, Or would they legally permit the brutal, inhumane institution of human slavery to expand further west? The fierce debate over this single question became a toxic political poison, slowly breaking the fragile unity that held the northern and southern states together. By the mid-19th century, the United States was effectively operating as two completely different worlds, with distinct economies and values that were rapidly drifting apart. In the North, the Industrial Revolution was booming. Giant factories, sprawling railroad networks, and bustling cities created a fast-paced, modern, and highly wage-based society. This explosion of production and mobility wasn't just physical infrastructure. It was a fundamental shift in how people lived, worked, and viewed their personal future. Massive waves of immigrants arrived from Europe, filling these urban centers and providing the essential labor force that fueled the northern economic engine even further. But the South had developed along a completely different path, one whose entire economy and society were built on something far darker. The South was completely different. Its economy was heavily linked to large-scale agriculture, and its massive wealth was almost entirely dependent on one cash crop: cotton. Plantations were vast, sprawling estates. This economic structure favored a wealthy elite class, but it required a massive, brutal, and inhumane system to function profitably. The engine driving this southern wealth was the brutal, systemic institution of enslaved human labor. It was a dark, dehumanizing system that caused immense, immeasurable suffering. The psychological and moral divide between the North and South grew toxic. The North increasingly viewed slavery as a moral evil that needed to be contained. The South saw these restrictions as a direct attack on their economy and their rights, leading to an intractable deadlock that seemed impossible to peacefully resolve. Every time a new territory or state was added to the Union, the political deadlock flared up again, directly threatening to tear the young nation apart forever. The nation was essentially standing on a powder keg, waiting for a single spark to ignite the most destructive conflict the young American Republic would ever face. Desperate attempts were made to find compromise after compromise, but every single political effort to bridge this wide divide failed to provide a long-term solution. The political argument intensified into an uncontrollable storm, turning the halls of government into an arena of open hostility and intense, dangerous, and escalating resentment. The stage was set. The storm was ready to break. Before the cannons roared, let's take a quick break and stay tuned for the aftermath of the election. Welcome back. By the late 1850s, the United States was essentially a massive powder keg, just desperately waiting for a single spark to ignite. That inevitable spark finally arrived in the highly contentious election of 1860. A defining moment that would shatter the nation's fragile foundation completely. Abraham Lincoln, a tall, thoughtful lawyer from Illinois, emerged as the victor. He was well known for his firm political stance against the expansion of slavery. For the wealthy plantation owners in the southern states, Lincoln's unexpected victory was seen as the ultimate breaking point, sparking absolute panic and outrage. They firmly believed that their entire agricultural way of life, their massive economic wealth, and their deeply ingrained cultural identity were facing total extinction. Refusing to accept the new president, South Carolina took a drastic, unprecedented step. They officially declared that they were breaking away from the United States. Like a rapid chain reaction, 10 other southern states quickly followed suit, dramatically pulling their borders away from the Union in an act of defiance. Together, these 11 states boldly declared themselves an entirely new, independent nation, calling themselves the Confederate States of America, effectively splitting the map. In mere months, decades of shared history, mutual struggles, and the carefully crafted constitutional unity of the Founding Fathers were shattered into countless pieces. The United States of America was now officially split in two. It was an unprecedented constitutional crisis that no previous generation had ever planned for. However, President Abraham Lincoln absolutely refused to accept this illegal secession, standing firm in his constitutional duty to keep the fractured nation whole. He famously believed and declared that a house divided against itself cannot stand, making it clear that the Union must be preserved at all costs. The time for peaceful debate, political compromises, and passionate arguments in the halls of Congress had officially passed into the dark shadows of history. Both sides stubbornly dug in their heels, aggressively mobilizing their citizens and stockpiling weapons for a conflict neither side truly thought would last long. The terrible, deafening roar of cannons was about to replace the voices of politicians, plunging America into its bloodiest and most devastating historical nightmare. In 1861, the cannons fired, and the American Civil War erupted. It was a brutal, devastating conflict that pitted brother against brother. The industrialized North possessed significantly more men, more weapon factories, and extensive train lines, giving them a massive logistical advantage in the long run. However, the South fought fiercely and stubbornly on their own home territory, driven by a deep conviction to aggressively defend their newly declared independence. For 4 agonizing years, massive, stylized battles raged relentlessly across the American continent, leaving a massive, unforgettable scar on the nation's collective soul. The sheer scale of the destruction was completely unprecedented. Towns were flattened, fields burned, and the casualty numbers shocked the entire watching world. In the midst of this overwhelming chaos and bloodshed, President Lincoln realized that simply preserving the Union was no longer a sufficient moral goal. In a monumental shift, Lincoln officially issued the Emancipation Proclamation, boldly declaring that all enslaved people in the rebellious states were now forever free. It was a revolutionary turning point. The war was no longer just a political dispute over states' rights. It transformed into a moral crusade. It became an absolute crusade to permanently shatter the heavy, dark chains of human slavery once and for all across the entire American continent. Thousands of newly freed African-American men bravely took up arms, proudly joining the Union Army to fight directly for their own permanent liberation. With the moral high ground and superior industrial strength, the Union forces slowly and methodically pushed deep into the exhausted, starving Southern territories. By the spring of 1865, the Confederate Army was completely depleted. General Robert E. Lee formally surrendered, effectively ending the long rebellion. The Confederate flag was lowered, the rebellious states were brought back under federal control, and the fractured United States was finally whole again. Most importantly, the horrific institution of slavery was constitutionally abolished forever through the 13th Amendment, legally ending centuries of systemic and brutal human bondage. The Union was saved, and physical chains were gone, but the ultimate military victory came at an unimaginably high and devastating cost for everyone. But the war had claimed over 600,000 lives, leaving deep, lasting psychological wounds that a simple legal document could not instantly heal. The physical chains were gone, but the intense struggle for true equality, basic civil rights, and social integration had only just begun in the South. The nation slowly rebuilt its shattered economy, transforming rapidly into an industrial powerhouse. Yet the bitter cultural resentment between the regions silently festered. As the decades passed into the 20th and 21st centuries, the United States grew into the world's largest economy and a global superpower. Today, America boasts the largest global economy and massive cultural influence, preparing to co-host major international events like the 2026 World Cup. But beneath the shiny, modern surface, the echoes of that historical 19th century division still deeply resonate in the everyday lives of modern American citizens. The modern political map often strikingly reflects the exact same geographical scars of the past, visibly split into deeply polarized red and blue ideological camps. Fierce political debates over states' rights, federal authority, and cultural values continue to heavily dominate the national conversation, remarkably mirroring the arguments of the past. The Civil War ended the brutal institution of slavery, But the complex challenge of truly uniting completely different cultural perspectives remains an ongoing American experiment. It serves as a constant, powerful reminder that a nation's true long-term stability relies entirely on its ability to continually repair its own internal fractures. From a simple wooden-covered wagon heading into the unknown Western frontier to leading humanity's technological advancements, the American historical journey is relentlessly dynamic. History always has many different perspectives, and this is just one way to tell the story of how the United States survived its greatest internal crisis. All the historical facts, dates, and academic sources used to create this episode are completely linked in the description below for you to explore further. If you want to see how this newly reunited nation mobilized to survive 2 world wars and dominate the 20th century, do not miss out. Make sure to hit subscribe to channel, leave a like on this video, and join us for the next exciting episode of our continuing World History series.
Make sure to hit subscribe to Gold Era History, leave a like on this video, and join us for the next exciting episode of our continuing World History series.